Okay, our opening words are from Annie Dillard, as the rest of the service is based on her ideas. It's about waking up. A child wakes up over and over again and notices that she's living. She dreams a long, loving, and exuberant life of the senses, in love with beauty and power, oblivious to herself. And then suddenly, bingo, she wakes up and feels herself alive. She notices her own awareness, and she notices that she is set down here mysteriously in a going world. Let's be comfortable in our bodies and in the chair and on the earth. It has always been a happy thought to me that the creek runs all night, every new minute, whether I wish it or know it or care. As a closed book on a shelf continues to whisper to itself its own inexhaustible tale, so many things have been shown to me on these banks. So much light has illumined me by reflection here where the water comes down, that I can hardly believe that this grace never flags, that the pouring from ever renewable sources is endless, impartial, and free. The book Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, A Spiritual Journey, chronicles a year that Annie Dillard spent exploring the woods and waters near her home in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountain area. It's not a nature diary. It's a spiritual autobiography disguised as a field guide, a luminous meditation on nature, perception, and the sacred mysteries, rich with vivid descriptions and ecstatic encounters with the natural world. I'm going to read a few sections. The first has to do with a bird. The mockingbird took a single step into the air and dropped. His wings were still folded against his side, as though he were singing from limb and not falling, accelerating 32 feet per second through empty air. Just a breath before he would have been dashed to the ground, he unfurled his wings with exact, deliberate care, revealing broad bars of white, spread his elegant white-banded tail, and so floated onto the grass. I had just rounded a corner when this insouciant step caught my eye. There was no one else in sight. The fact of his free fall was like the old philosophical conundrum about the tree that falls in the forest. The answer must be, I think, that beauty and grace are performed whether or not we will see or sense them. The least we can do is try to be there. That's her case. Go out in nature, not expecting, just go out there. Of course, I'm remembering the first rule of hiking is that the early bird gets the face full of spider webs. Dillard had been reading a book about people that were blind from birth who had their sight back. The medicine discovered that a cornea transplant would actually solve many kinds of blindness. And so a whole group of people, there was kind of a wave of when that was done, suddenly had sight. And those in attendance studied and wrote down what it was like to be able to see for the first time. And one was about a girl who had been blind since birth. When the doctor took her bandages off and led her into the garden, the girl, who was no longer blind, saw what she called the tree with the lights in it. It was for this tree I searched through the peach orchards of summer, the the forests of fall and down winter and spring for years. Then one day I was walking along Tinker Creek and thinking of nothing at all. Well, let me interrupt. The creek was a kind of wild area, but there were some houses from time to time, and there were some backyards that she'd kind of be walking by in this wild open space. One day, I was walking along thinking nothing at all, and I saw the tree with the lights in it. I saw the backyard cedar where the mourning doves roost, charged and transfigured, each cell buzzing with flame. I stood on the grass with the lights in it, grass that was holy fire, utterly focused and utterly dreamy. It was less like seeing than like being for the first time. Seeing, knocked breathless by a powerful glance. The flood of fire abated, but I'm still spending the power I got that day. Gradually the lights went out in the cedar. The colors died, the cells unflamed and disappeared. I was still ringing. I had been my whole life a bell and never knew it until at that moment I was lifted and struck. I have since only very rarely seen the tree with the lights in it. The vision comes and goes, mostly goes, but I live for it. For the moment the mountains open and a new light roars in spate through the crack and the mountains slam. This is a small little section early in the book where she describes essentially a mystic vision. She doesn't call it that. She just is out in nature and things happen. She notices things. She distinguishes between two kinds of seeing, the passive glance and the active gaze. The latter requires attention, patience, and love. She's teaching a kind of nature meditation in her book, a kind of way of being out in the splendor with a receptivity, not much focus, not much agenda, just openness. In a world of distraction, Dillard's work is a call to attention. She reminds us that the sacred is not elsewhere, it is here, in the rustle of leaves, the shimmer of water, the breath in our lungs. Now, Ann and I have been inspired by this, and we've gone through our writings and brought some things that we have written actually before reading Dillard that align with this, and Ann comes first.
So this is a writing I did about an early life experience in nature. It's called, excuse me, Almeria Avenue. To get to St. Teresa's School from Uncle Bill's house on Almeria Avenue in Coral Gables, Florida, was 9 blocks straight up Almeria to where it dead ended at the school. My cousin Chris was in my grade, but he ran off to find his friends, and Minnie and I walked together along the bright street with palm trees on the green grass parkway, searching for coconuts, hoping one might be on the ground. Some of the houses were large 2-story with big porches and columns holding up the porch roof. Most of them bright white stucco, no wooden Victorians like in Skullvale, New Jersey. Some even had plastic pink flamingos standing on the lawns, and bushes full of pink and yellow and red hibiscus. Even though it was only January, the sun was bright and hot. Although there was a kind of freedom in those 9 blocks, dread would creep back as we neared St. Teresa's. Just when the sun started to feel too hot and bright, there was a dark tunnel of shade ahead, like entering into an enchanted tunnel made by an enormous city of mangrove trees that filled the parkway on both sides of the street. A giant twisted mass of arching, curving trunks and branches and giant roots reaching down from way up high that became like trunks themselves. The trees, so old that the masses of one grew into the next with infinite secret spaces and openings and places to climb, so you knew it was enchanted and could barely resist trying to climb in on the way to school. If it wasn't for knowing that Uncle Bill had a whip like Graham's and the nuns at St. Teresa's had them also, we would have disappeared into the trees on the way to school. As it was, we had to wait until walking home to try our luck at finding an entrance into the enchantment, to climb up and into the embrace of those cool, curving surfaces. Those trees were a massive wall of hanging root branches that had long ago reached the ground, and each grown into a trunk of their own, until the space between them that may have existed when they were planted was now filled in, and the strip of lawn between the sidewalk and the street was solid root and tree. We crave trees, woods, fields, dark, overgrown places where creatures might live, where we might cross over from this world to a fairy tale, or like the Pied Piper, who had all the children follow him into a mountain that opened up, and they just walked through into another land. We could walk through into that land where children would be treated better and loved and wanted. Trees like this must have opened to other lands. If you found the right place, the right opening at the right time, perhaps that we thought that one day we wouldn't have to go home to Uncle Bill's quiet inattentiveness with his beer bottle, distant stare, and sudden anger. We wouldn't have to go to St. Teresa's school with the scolding nuns and the fear of the whips, which thankfully they seemed to use mostly on their favorite bad kids. I wouldn't have to be in the way of my cousin Chris and his daily interventions to taunt me. We never did find an escape, but those afternoons, climbing and searching, were an escape, a place we could always imagine something more and better. Almeria Avenue, a place of refuge where all the unpredictable things would stop. The trees had always been like this, would never change, where you could slip through one of those hollows between decades of growing and roots seeking moisture and hardening into the permanent shape of their journey, where everything hardens into permanence and nothing ever changes. To slip through a dark opening into a light place where no one gets sick or dies, where, like Peter Pan, you never have to grow up, and you can go back to the days in the house on top of the hill with the redwood playhouse that Daddy built long ago, and where Johnny and Donald and Minnie and I could run under the protective canopy of the oaks, and Daddy would still come home. The fairy tales we read, Rapunzel, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Pinocchio, Rip Van Winkle, and so many more, had different kinds of going to sleep, of suspension of time, of being in a spell, or walking into a mountain or another land, or a witch to do you evil, or a fairy godmother to help you out. Sometimes help was from the animals. You had to do a favor or sacrifice something to break the spell or be freed from the curse or enchantment. I never was able to break the spell in Coral Gables, Florida, but the sense of time stopping or falling asleep for 100 years like Sleeping Beauty, or walking away into a mountain with the Pied Piper, or just going off into the woods at night where the fairies come out and dance, were always just around the corner, outside the window, in the toy box, under the bed, or in the dim shadows of the closet. So that in the repeating sameness of the days, there was always an air of waiting for some unknown thing to happen, and an attempt to be good and patient through all those days where nothing happened, because something might. So that writing really started with a memory that was so clear, the images. And in the writing of it, it expanded to include so much more of the inner story and those healing images. And we all have those experiences in nature, those memories in nature. And we can re-enter them and open them up like those seeds in the stories. They can unfold when we meditate on them in writing. It's our creative imagination. We all have the capacity to unfold our own inner worlds, our few memories, the ones that sustained us, the times in nature. It's just a simple descriptive writing and a kind of meditation that can lead us to the deeper meaning and to claim the beauty of all of our experiences and all of our stories. It's just descriptive writing that gets past our critical thinking to the beauty that exists in even our most difficult memories. So I want to read one more, and this one is a moment later in life of being held and sustained in nature. I remember one late summer day in the ocean, Hendry's Beach, the water unusual warm 67 degrees, out past the breakers, floating on my back, not shivering as usual, relaxed arms out to the side, the whole sky above, the whole ocean holding me. One moment, one day, one timeless segment of time. The salty water soft on my skin, the strength of tanned 27-year-old limbs melted into everything. The water of possibility, the expanded minutes of forgiveness, the impossible, eternal, out-of-time place where everything could turn out all right, as if I belonged here after all.
I think of Tinker's Creek as a pretty exotic place. In fact, it was near town. Actually, Walden was near town. Thoreau could walk in and beg a dinner off a friend, and did often, actually. So we don't need to go into the wilds, although going into the wilds is a wonderful thing. It can be close to here. Ann and I like to hike. A favorite is up behind Franceschi Park, and there's a little hilltop there where we have often seen deer, so we call it the Bambi hike. Close at hand, this place where we live has wonders. I have one, I have a little quote here, and Owen would know this as a thorough hiker. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single blister. This one is about a hike, and there was a creek. I call it pilgrimage. Seeking restoration, you hike to where fresh water flows through granite walls, and ease a doubting spirit into mild currents under smooth rock ramparts carved by constant streams. There is a healing here in this natural cathedral, where wildness makes the music of 1,000 choirs. The deep stone gorge cradles like some ancient deity, offering silent sureness and guidance to the energy of the moment. Important troubles slip away. Insistence of movements is the essence here. All parts of this place have one purpose: to become channel and pulsing. Every surge is different, each instant unique, every season its own event, and yet here, something is always the same, something quieting. You float in a small pool, dust washing from spent feet. Other seekers cannot distract from this solitary communion. You are held and cooled and cleansed. This baptism requires no liturgy. Arising from the creek, the blessing is sweet. All things are made new. Back to Annie Dillard. Live water heals memories. I look up the creek and here it comes, the future, being borne aloft as on winding successes of laden trays. The anticipation of looking up the creek is an exaltation of newness. The creek is a mediator, benevolent and impartial. It waters an undeserving world. So what do you get when you cross a river and a stream? Wet feet. I had another joke about a creek, but I forget it. Oh well, water under the bridge. Unrelated, what do they call a whistleblower at Tesla? A muskrat. Which I use as the introduction to a little section on muskrats here. Okay, she was fascinated. These little river otter kind of creatures. She'd heard about them. She'd seen some sign that they might be around, but she hadn't seen one. Now, she is visiting this over a period of a year. She really wanted to see a muskrat. And some local says, well, they're scared of us, so they're hiding. You're not going to see them. What do I need to make them less scared of me? I don't know, you're moving around. Maybe if you didn't move around. So she started going to a place that might be muskrat territory and sat really, really still. She writes of lying still for hours, waiting for a muskrat to appear. She learns that only by becoming part of the landscape, by quieting her breath, her thoughts, her presence, can she witness the muskrat's emergence. You must stalk the spirit, not with force, but with surrender. So she's saying the spiritual seeker must relinquish the desire to grasp, to name, to master the mystery. We can't say, okay, I'd like to see a muskrat at 10 a.m. tomorrow, fits into my schedule. We're not in charge. The muskrat is in charge. The mystery is in charge. It'll come when it comes. She lies in the grass, motionless, watching the creek. She is not hunting, not chasing, not even hoping. She is waiting. And then the muskrat appears. This is not about a rodent. It's about soul. This is a symbol, a metaphor for the inner mysteries, elusive, shy, easily frightened by the ego's noise. Stillness is a form of ego suspension, a practice. Annie Dillard empties herself of striving, of identity, of expectation. She becomes the creek, and the bank. And only then does the muskrat, the symbol of deeper knowing, only then does she glimpse it. Our spiritual perspectives often emphasize the search for truth, the search for meaning through experience, through reason. But here, Dillard invites us to a different kind of knowing, not through analysis, but through presence, not through doing, but through being. This is the paradox of spiritual stalking. We do not chase the sacred, we wait for it. We become quiet enough for it to trust us. This letting go, this emptied state of mind, highlights a process of detaching from our everyday concerns to reach a deeper insight. It doesn't just happen out in Tinker Creek. Anne was walking home late at night and saw a mountain lion on her street walk right by her front door. She stopped for a moment and then thought, no, I should keep going. And she's glancing over, she's fully aware that lion is aware she's there. She's aware the lion is aware. Hopefully the lion is after something else. Turns out it was. She gets home fine. Mountain lion finally found a raccoon or something, whatever the dinner was for the moment, right here. Okay. I mean, this is witnessing. You can get on the internet and you can see trail cams and house doorbell ring videos and things. And right near where you live, you will see coyotes and mountain lions and things from these little, there's something different about sensing that body near you, right over there. Viktor Frankl, who I will name drop and say I studied with years ago, and I was very taken with his emphasis that meaning exists out in the world. We don't always create it, we detect it. But it won't be obvious. In most cases, it'll take some patience, it might take some work to sort of ferret it out. I think that's what Dillard is talking about. And my second piece is a little longer. It's about, I'm talking about walking in the California foothills. It's about this. What a fine day, I thought, for a walk in the hills. The sky is pleasantly warm and clear. The breeze drifting through the trees makes the world seem fresh and new. On an outward level, this stroll is a very small adventure. I pass near some old sheds that were once used for animals and have been neglected for years. The dark planks have texture and character that are the gifts of the seasons. Further away, some cows graze with what seems like infinite inner peace. My love affair with the beauty of this landscape is not rare. Anyone who visits the coastal hills has to be swept up in the natural grandeur of such a place. As a native Californian, I share in the belief that this is about as close to sublime as we're going to find in this planet. So, okay, I'm in a good mood. I am appreciating the simple experience of moving the body and how it takes me into a reflective space. There is more than a lovely day to celebrate. I'm grateful to live in a part of the world where people are curious. The seekers that are numerous in these parts are, to me, kindred spirits. Being in the company of adventurous types is gratifying. Around here, I don't feel like the only one who is forever poking at difficult questions. The people that appeal to me are forever discovering new layers of possibility. Their larger adventures are often within. After all, our rich inner lives are what we have to show for how we have invested our energies over the years. Whatever we might accomplish in practical terms is modest. It is as if a life is the task of building an interior castle of ideas, feelings, experiences, and dreams. On this day, as I wind my way through a glen with a small creek, most of my attention is in the private world of thoughts. Bits of conversation float through my mind. a memory comes of a very successful friend who once asked for ideas on how to live so that at the end he would have no regrets. I thought long and hard, and then answered that I thought regrets are inevitable. There isn't time to do everything or fix everything. There is always some grief about all the good ideas we never got around to developing. I don't think life has to be perfect to be fulfilling. I suggested that this friend give some thought to how to handle regrets well, rather than putting too much energy into avoiding them. These days, I am far more interested in self-acceptance than in further improvement. Seems to me that a good deal of pop psychology is thinly veiled self-rejection. Of course, I want to continue to discover more about life and myself. I just don't want to miss the quiet knowing that has always already been present. The sun is starting to get low in the trees. The air is growing cooler. At moments like these, I can hear the angels sing. Rainer Maria Rilke says, "Go into yourself and see how deep the place is from which your life grows." Annie Dillard does not offer easy answers. She offers something better, a way of seeing that transforms the ordinary into the holy. She invites us to become pilgrims, not tourists, in our own lives, to walk slowly, to look closely, and to live with awe. May we, like Annie Dillard, learn to see the world as a burning bush, every leaf aflame with the presence of the divine. Some action steps for earnest seekers. Practice the sacred unknowing. Try to let go of the need for answers, at least from time to time. Dwell in mystery. Maybe keep a journal of moments when the world seemed luminous. A leaf, a child's laugh, a shaft of light. These are your burning bushes. While preparing some ideas yesterday, I looked out the kitchen window into the garden. There's a bush there with very bright green leaves, and I thought I saw one of the leaves move. It was a small bird, a bird I don't remember seeing before, very bright, luminous green, and it hovered, stayed there on a twig for a while, and then it went and hid in a thicket, and I saw a blue jay nearby. The sighting of something, and I, of course, God gave us the internet. I got to look it up. I think it's called a golden-crested warbler. I didn't see a golden crest. Anne explained to me that when they're excited or something, a little crest comes up, and you don't see it all the time. I don't know much about birds. She teaches me a lot. Second action step, fast from affirmation. For 1 week, if you can, avoid labeling things, experiences, observations, as good or bad. Just let them be some unnamed thing. Notice what emerges in the absence of judgment. Instead of striving for insight, practice openness. Say, I do not know. Try to let mystery be the teacher. The third and last, copy Annie Dillard. Walk without seeking. Take a walk. Any walk around Santa Barbara is a walk in nature. You don't have to head for the hills. So the hills are very close. The ocean's very close. Yesterday I was down at Shoreline Park, and the albatross, a whole flock of them, and they were flying what was high to them because there's a cliff. But to me it was eye level and very close. It was very strange to have them come right across like this. Practice pure seeing. Observe without naming. What arises in moments of stillness? What images, memories, or feelings surface? These are your muskrats, symbols for the inner mysteries, invitations to deeper reflection. To sum up, Annie Diller's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek is not merely a celebration of nature. It is a profound spiritual text that invites us into the darkness of divine mystery. She teaches us to see not with the eyes of certainty, but with the heart of surrender. For seekers, her work offers a path not of ascent, but of descent into silence, into shadow, and ultimately into the mysteries of the unknown. I will leave you with a few words. May you walk slowly through the world. May your eyes be opened to the light that dances in trees, in faces, in moments. May you see the tree with the lights in it. And may you know that you, too, are part of the radiance. Namaste. Blessed be. And so it goes.